I'll say stuff broadly that happened in Kenosha. I think there's two ways of gathering information in our current media environment. I think you have like passive information gathering and active information gathering. You're not, you're lying to either other people or yourself.
You have less experience.
That's a really hard one.
Number one, so I listened to a series of discussions between Jordan Peterson, who
I know, for instance, if you've ever heard of like Project Veritas. Oh, I should have my glasses on to look smarter.
how we arrive at those
How do I
things can really, I don't know, it says a lot about us, I think, as people and as a society. So, hey, Stephen, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good, thanks. Tuesdays are a long day, but I'm glad to be here now. I'm glad to see your face. Sorry you can't see ours. Can you hear me all right here?
I can hear you fine, and I can see you guys perfectly.
All right, very good. Anyway, we were just talking about like where we get our information from on a regular basis, and you know how many people today looked up news from like a news website versus sort of content creators or favorite personalities. And I know that you did talk about that yesterday. So
yeah, I was going to say, what a coincidence, because here I am to talk about topics related to information literacy. Oh my goodness. Can I jump right into it? Are you ready to go?
Please go right ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Trying to be a little more organized today. So broadly speaking, our mutual friend Bill here has brought me in to talk to you about things related to researching information. And I kind of have these grouped around three broad topics. So the first one is asking, what are we searching for? Where can we find information about what we're searching for? The second one has to do with passive versus active information gathering. And then the third one has to do with checking or understanding your biases when you go to do research. For the first question, it seems a little self-evident that like obviously different information comes from different sources, but I'm surprised sometimes when I'm arguing with somebody and they want to get into like a medical debate or they want to argue about the coronavirus, they'll shoot me like a link to a New York Post article or a link to even like a CNN article. And it's like, well, if you go deeper in the article, usually they'll be citing a medical journal or something, or some study that's published in like Nature or the New England Journal of Medicine or the Lancet. Like, let's talk about this instead of citing a news article. Different types of information are going to come from different places, and it's good to be aware of where to look for different types of information so that you're getting the best and highest quality and most original version of that information, rather than it already being digested and coming through like a news article. So for medical information, I mentioned, one of those three journals, or there's quite a few good like medical journals that you might look for to publish studies related to the coronavirus or other health-related issues. Obviously, COVID-19 is the hot topic right now. For historical information, places like Wikipedia can be a decent starting point. Smaller communities on Reddit, especially the Ask History subreddit, places that have historians that are willing to engage with questions and respond, can be really good for digging into like PhDs or specialists that will give you good answers relating to specific history questions. For current event information or for like breaking news, getting like fact-based reporting from different news sources can be good, but beware of interpretations. So like people that just report facts like Reuters or the Associated Press, and then some foreign sources like even like Al Jazeera or the BBC can give you a different point of view on things. But always be aware that for current events or for breaking news, situations can change really fast, and a 10 or 15 second video clip that you see might look entirely different when we get 20 or 30 or 40 seconds beforehand. Arguably, we could say that a lot of the stuff, I'll say stuff broadly, that happened in Kenosha was a result of people seeing the, I'm trying to remember the guy. Oh man, I've argued about this person so much, and I'm drawing a blank right now. But there was a guy that was shot in the back by the police a few times, stepping into the police car, Jacob Blake. And people originally saw like a 20 to 30 second video clip of that, and it looked pretty bad. And then there was a lot of kind of inflamed response to that. And then when more context was released later, regardless if you think it was right or wrong, at the very least, it dramatically changed the nature of the interaction rather than just like the 10 or 15 second clip that you saw. I always tell people that you should be very wary of anytime you're given like a 15 second video clip and try to think, well, what could have happened prior to this that would have made me, view this situation differently? Because oftentimes it ends up being the case that when you see something later on, it'll kind of change. It'll contextualize, what you're seeing now. When you're researching for information, regardless of what you're looking for or the sources you're getting it from, be aware that getting information from pundits, that is not research. That's like kind of a form of entertainment / research. Pundits will have their own biases. They don't oftentimes read sources. Sometimes they're not reliable. Oftentimes they have little to no accountability for their opinions because it's just entertainment. This is a defense that people like Alex Jones have used in court before for what they do. So listening to pundits can be kind of fun. It could be educational. It could give you a starting point. There are going to be some podcasts that might be, like hardcore history or other things that might be a little bit more educational than others. But if it's a good podcast or if it's a good show, they should be citing research that you can just like take a look at as well. You don't have to read studies wall to wall, but just be aware of like the studies or be aware of the things that people are talking about rather than just, oh, well, I heard this from Joe Rogan or Anderson Cooper or Sean Hannity or the Young Turks, and now I'm going to wholeheartedly like repeat it verbatim without actually checking anything that, they're talking about. The second broad topic is like, I think there's two ways of gathering information in our current media environment. I think you have like passive information gathering and active information gathering. So I would say that passive information gathering is basically when you open your phone and you scroll through Twitter, you scroll through Reddit, you scroll through Instagram, you go through whatever social media feeds you're on, you are constantly being inundated with either 1-minute meme videos from like Democracy Now! Or some PragerU stuff, or you're getting like a meme that has like 5 lines of text that's making with a scary picture in the background that's making like a strong argument or something, or you're just getting posts or headlines of articles from friends or social media people. When you are sitting in front of a passive feed like that, when you're just scrolling, keep in mind that the only goal of that feed is to maximize how much you view it, the view time, and then how much it can monetize you. Can people get a subscriber out of you? Can they sell merchandise or whatever? The idea that it has to be factually correct or anything, this takes a huge backseat to those other things. If somebody can be more entertaining and they sacrifice some factual accuracy for it, people oftentimes will jump at the opportunity to do so because hyperbole sells really well, and being boring and factual is boring and nobody wants to watch that generally. So always be aware that when you're sitting in front of information that's being fed to you from another source, that you're not, that doesn't count as research. That's just you being entertained and then kind of being force fed by whatever social media sphere you happen to be in. Some of these will be more factually accurate than others, but again, it's a passive process. You're not doing any work to make sure that the information you're getting is true. For active information gathering, that always requires you have to make some deliberate effort to go out of your way to Google something, to look on Wikipedia, to watch a documentary, to do something. It's you getting outside of your bubble and maybe even picking up a book and reading it. It's you getting outside of your bubble and trying to find information that somebody isn't just willingly showing you immediately. And that process is how you become more informed on things rather than just kind of regurgitating whatever the common talking point of any particular group or bubble of the day is. For the third kind of broad topic, before you go to do any type of research on a topic or have a discussion with somebody on a topic, it's always really good to be aware of and to be honest about your biases going into a conversation. And don't do the thing where it's like, oh, I'm totally unbiased. I'm like a neutral observer of the universe. You're not. You're lying to either other people or yourself at the worst if you think that. Everybody has biases, If somebody links me a Joe Rogan clip or something, personally, I don't like Joe Rogan when he's talking about medical or scientific stuff, but I'll be aware of that going into it because it might be the fact that he says something and I want it to be wrong, but it might not be wrong. Not everything Joe Rogan says is wrong. Not everything that any far left or far right leading creator says is necessarily wrong. But it's good to be aware of that going in so that you're fact checking things where it's like you hear something and I know that that's not true. There's no way that thing's it, but let me check it anyway just to be sure. I engage with social media a little bit more aggressively or violently maybe than other people do, but a lot of the most important things I have learned are some conservative or far left person on Twitter will say something that I think is really stupid and I'm ready to start flaming them. But before I do it, I'm like, okay, well, real quick, let me just double check and make sure that what I'm about to say is true because I really want them to be wrong, but maybe they're not. And I've actually learned a surprising amount of stuff that way. Whenever you're searching for stuff, always look for contrary information. It's really important. If I think that, say, like socialized healthcare or whatever is good for people, I think that affects better healthcare outcomes in the United States, rather than constantly Googling for Medicare for all, help poor, social medicine, help everyone. Maybe it's good to Google like socialized medicine bad or social medicine bad outcomes or Medicare for all problems or whatever, just to get like the other side of the story. It might be that there's a bunch of garbage over there. Maybe maybe you Google something like that and all you come up with is a bunch of like, very politically, ideologically driven attacks on the policies. Or it might be that you Google that and all of a sudden you get a whole bunch of information related to, oh, wow, there are problems with this that I didn't know about before. And whenever I just Google, my policy position good, I tend to not see that information. Be aware that when you're asking questions, sometimes the question that you ask is more important than the answers that you're getting. One common thing that people will go back and forth on forever has to do with, especially after BLM and everything, do black people get killed by the police more than white people? The answer is technically no, but that's because per capita there's a different amount of black people and a different amount of white people in the United States. So some people might counter and say, well, there's way less black people. Let's look at the stats per capita. But then a conservative might say, well, hold on. Instead of looking at it per capita, let's look at it per crime committed. And then you might say, well, how about instead of per crime committed, let's just look at violent offense, right? You can go back and forth on these really, really, really hardcore. And just because somebody cites one stat doesn't necessarily mean that their whole argument is proved and done. There might be a different question that you want to ask or something that's more relevant to your question. Although you can kind of get into the weeds on that depending on the issue. Make sure that when you read something, you read the entire article or you read a full source. Do not just read a headline, especially, God help you, just because the headline agrees with you. There are plenty of times where a headline will come out and you'll see it and you'll be like, oh my God, look at this headline. It's so wacky. This is like, or like it's dumb, and you write off the article, or you see it, it's like, oh, it's correct. I remember that. And and then later on, people will do this. They'll say, oh, well, I heard that X actually is worse for you than Y. It's like, well, where'd you hear that? Oh, well, I read a piece by the New York Times. Like, no, you didn't. You read the headline to it. And if you read the full article, you'll see they don't even actually say that statement. They don't make it as strong as you sound, but you didn't read the article, so you're not aware of that. So make sure that you're always reading an entire article. These articles are usually written, they take like 5 to 10 minutes to read. They're not hard. I'm not asking you to read like a full study out of the Lancet and break out like the tables and get your, econ level stats analysis out for it. Just make sure that you're reading full articles. I think it's really important. Don't make absolute statements about whatever it is you're researching. Make sure that you're only making statements as strong as whatever it is you're reading into at the time. We've seen a lot of problems with this related to the coronavirus. So for instance, when we're looking at alternative medicines like hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin for treating COVID-19, it's not intelligent to say ivermectin will never be good for COVID-19. Ivermectin is not good for COVID-19. But a better statement might be, right now, so far, the data doesn't show ivermectin to be an effective therapy for COVID-19. As long as you're framing things like this, even if it seems inconsequential, later on down the road, it's going to be way easier for you to accept new information because you haven't married that position prior and you don't have to admit that you're wrong about anything. It's very possible that you can say today, ivermectin doesn't seem to be effective for COVID-19, but a big study comes out tomorrow. You're like, hey, you know what? Now we have the data to say it does seem effective for treating COVID-19. Whereas prior to that, if you say it'll never help, it'll never work, it's going to be way harder emotionally for you to back away from that position. Finally, in terms of biases, be emotionally invested in the outcomes of whatever policy that you're advocating for, not the process. We do not care about the process. That is not what you should be emotionally tied to. You should be emotionally tied to the outcome. If you want, say, to reduce the amount of homeless people, that is a good outcome to be emotionally attached to. You want to make there be less homeless people. But if you get emotionally attached to a certain process like public housing or rent control or higher minimum wage, if it does end up being that the data shows that these policies are an ineffective way to effect your outcome, then what happens is you start arguing for processes instead of caring about outcomes, and then you get into a weird world where it seems like you become detached from what it was you were originally advocating for, and now you're only married politically to some type of process ideology or some sort of ideology that pushes a certain process regardless of whether or not it's helping or not helping your particular issue. Yeah, I think so. Broadly speaking, those are the three ways that I break out information gathering. Just be aware of the information you're searching for and kind of what a good resource is for it. Make sure that when you're doing research, if you count it as research, it's stuff that you are actively searching for, not stuff that you've seen fed in front of you in some social media feed. And just make sure that you're aware of all of your biases when you go to research. You don't have to have no biases. You just have to make sure that you're aware of them so that you're kind of checking yourself as you're doing your homework to make sure you're not just falling into a media bubble where you're only reinforcing your own opinions. Okay, I'm good. Oof.
That's pretty good. That was about the same amount of time too. So yeah. All right. So that was a lot. Okay, that was a lot. Does anybody have questions on the stuff you just covered? Does that all make sense, everybody?
Yeah. Shut the fuck up, Movement.
All right.
It's a stupid.
How about
fucking
other
meme.
questions you might have, Christina? Yeah, go ahead.
So, do you have any websites where like when you're looking for information on a topic, like looking for like current news, and like these websites are normally pretty valid and normally like aren't like ad-libbing and making stuff up. Like for like current events or like medical stuff, like what are some websites that you have that you can do that?
The trusted websites that you trust for,
That's a better way to put it.
like fact reporting and not opinion.
Usually most, I don't know if some people get triggered by this, but usually mainstream media sources are good at reporting factually correct stuff. They might spin stuff or selectively report things, but usually it's very rare that even Fox News, even CNN, it's very rare that they will publish like an outright lie. So if you're just looking for some factual piece of information, usually any mainstream media source will be okay because there are editors, there are people that usually get fired if they mess up on something. But more often than not, people aren't aware of this, but here's like a piece of information that not many people are aware of. There aren't usually that many studies published about a given topic. It's very rare. So like if somebody asks a question like, oh, well, what are suicide rates among post-op trans people? If somebody asks a question like that and somebody's like, oh, I've read like hundreds of studies on this. No, you haven't. There aren't hundreds of studies on this. In any given field, there's going to be like 1 to 5, maybe, really big studies, really big landmark studies, or huge meta-analyses that are summarizing a bunch of research that are going to give you an answer in this field. So it's not like you have to go around and cite like 50 things. Sometimes when you'll notice this, that sometimes there might be a question of like, what's better, natural immunity or immunity that you get via a vaccine? And somebody be like, oh, well, I know that natural immunity is better, or I know that vaccine immunity is better, and here's my 5 sources. But their sources are going to be news articles. And when you click through to the news articles, what you'll notice is that every single news article is just sourcing the same study that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine or Lancet or some other medical journal. It's like, oh, okay. Well, really, it's one source. You've linked 5 news sites, but they're all linking back to some, medical journal. So in terms of like sites that I trust, any mainstream media site, when it comes to factual, like just reporting what's happening, is generally going to be true. Some might omit certain facts, or some might kind of present some things, and I would argue maybe a dishonest light, but very, very, very rarely are they going to just outright lie about things.
Yeah. Do you know, Stephen, do you know about allsides.com? Have you ever checked that out? It's one that I like to use because it presents both conservative and liberal views, right? So you go there, you click on a headline, and it's going to give you something from Reuters, and it's going to give you something from The Hill, and it's going to give you something from whatever the equivalent is on the other side, right?
Yeah, I haven't. I think I've heard of it. I think there's a few websites like this where they try to give you. Yeah, I usually just like to go and find it myself because. I say this on the internet, so you shouldn't trust me, but like I usually by default never trust anybody that says they're giving you both sides of the issue, because usually these people have political slants. Although to be fair, I say that on the internet, so I mean, maybe don't trust me either, but these might be really good websites to try to like get an understanding of both sides. Maybe I don't have personal experience with it, so I don't want to make like a strong comment about it, but it might be a good way to briefly kind of look at like, well, what are the two sides of this issue?
Yeah. But good. Other questions, you guys? Yeah, go ahead.
How long does it usually take you to construct what you consider to be like a strong argument for a debate? Like, how much time do you usually spend on that?
It's super going to depend on the type of debate and the type of person that you're arguing against. So like if I have a conversation with like a neo-Nazi and it's going to be over the facts and figures relating to the Holocaust, this might be like days or weeks of research of like intensive like reading through books or trying to figure out what their arguments are to make sure that you're ready to counter every single particular point that they might bring up. Or it might be a conversation about, say, I'm trying to think of something. What's like a simpler thing? Everything is so complicated today. Maybe like, was the election stolen for like the Donald Trump and Biden election? Was that election stolen? That might be something that only takes me like a day of research. I just need to go and see like, well, what did all the federal courts say? Were any of these lawsuits given merit? What did the Supreme Court say for that Texas lawsuit? Like that might take me like a couple hours at the most, just because it's a pretty simple thing to look up. But yeah, it's going to depend on the topic that you're debating, and then it's going to depend on the person that you're debating and their level of like their level of knowledge relating to that particular topic.
Good. Anybody else? What else you got? Who else has questions? I wanted to ask if you could, so you mentioned previously, I think it was yesterday, but you mentioned something about not overreaching with your position, right? Not staking out a position that's further than your sort of realm of knowledge. And I wonder if you could maybe talk for just a minute about how you make sure that you don't do that when you're taking a position. Because I think it's not always an easy balance, right? Sometimes it's tricky.
Yeah, I think that it depends on. We'll do like two examples, I guess. The first big one is going to be related to the coronavirus. I think that there were probably public officials and politicians that were making statements that were a bit too strong about the potential efficacy of any vaccines that we got that later end up making you look bad when they end up not being as strong as they initially were claimed to have been. So people that were saying, like, if everybody just gets vaccinated, the virus will be gone. It's like, okay, well, you have some countries that are like 90% plus vaccinated in their adult population, and it seems like they're still experiencing surges of different variants. If you try to like say in the future, like, okay, well, yeah, I said that then, but now the information has changed, or now something has changed. Like, maybe a person that's approaching you in very good faith can understand that, but if there's somebody that's more adversarial, they're just going to look at you and be like, well, hold on, you lied. Like, you said that if we all got like Canada is arguably dealing with this right now, right? You said that if we all got vaccinated and we did what we were supposed to, that the mandates would go away, that the gyms would open up again, that restaurants could be seated again, that all of the mask mandates, all of this stuff would go away, and we got vaccinated, and that didn't happen. So you're in an area now where you've committed yourself too strongly to something prior that you're not able to walk back later without looking like you were just lying, because you weren't making a statement that was reflective of the data or the strength of the argument you had behind it. So, a statement like, if we all get vaccinated, we can almost for sure slow the spread of a virus and reduce hospitalizations. That was a statement that we could have said easily a year or 2 or 3 years ago. I don't know how long it's been now, Jesus. We could have said that statement 2 years ago and been safe 100% and still have been safe. And you could have defended that the entire time. But making stronger statements, well, you end up in a world where now you look like a liar in the future. And anybody knows this from boyfriend, girlfriend, from parents, children, or whatever. Once you've broken trust with somebody, it is almost impossible to get that back. That rebuilding process is almost insurmountable. That's related to, I guess, like building positions around. We talk about the coronavirus a lot. Another thing might be with videos that get posted online. One of the reasons why I don't like to do breaking news is because oftentimes a 20-second video will get posted. I mean, we see this a ton with police interactions, and the interaction will either look really bad for the cop or really bad for the suspect, and people are very quick to jump on like, oh my God, like this cop was totally out of line. This was crazy. This was horrible. Or, oh my God, look at this guy. He was totally out of line. Like the cop should have shot him. And it's like, okay, well, if we watch just a 15-second video, we can probably think of like 50 different scenarios that would have justified the behavior on either end. So maybe we should wait for an official statement, for more footage to come out, for other people to make statements on it, just for more information before we decide what's happened. Because oftentimes the decision that you're making about what happened is just whatever is more ideologically appealing to you at the time.
Go ahead, yeah.
If you're preparing for a discussion, do you have like a specific process that you walk through for gathering information and like what you choose to include and not include?
It's going to depend on the magnitude of the claim. So like, for instance, if somebody wants to have a debate about like capitalism versus socialism, this is going to incorporate like a ton of different things inside of it. So I might decide to focus on one or two areas. Like I might say like, oh, well, I think that capitalism or socialism does these things really well, and I can compare these countries. And then I might approach that conversation that way. If it's a more specific debate, like does the criminal justice system treat different groups of people like disproportionately negatively versus other groups of people, either by race or by class or whatever, or gender or whatever. That might be something where, okay, well, this is a more specific debate. I just need to look up like what are the most recent like 3 or 4 big studies or meta-analyses in this area, and then as long as I'm familiar with them pretty intimately, then I can argue my position pretty well because I'll know what the data says, and then it's just a matter of being able to accurately cite the study, basically.
got more? You want to make a little shot? So we're in the, I think I told you this before, but we're in the process of, staking out our sort of first positions in this big project that we're sort of taking off on. So,
What do you mean by first positions? I say that. What do you mean by that?
yeah. So the big assignment for this class is a big researched, persuasive, philosophical and socio-political paper or project, and it's served in 3 iterations. And the first iteration that's coming up this week is basically your notes and ideas and the things that questions you want to ask, a position that you might want to stake out, and places you might want to go and look for these things, the information that you don't yet have, the research that you haven't done yet. And I'm kind of sort of emphasizing the idea that we oughtn't stake out too big or too hard a position until we do the research, right? Mm-hmm. Which is something that you've alluded to several times, right? And I think it's extremely important.
Yeah, because if you stake out a really strong position and then start doing research, in one world you only look at stuff that agrees with you kind of subconsciously. Because that's just what you notice more. Like you're more ready to you'll more readily discredit information where it's like you read something that's like, oh, no way is that true, like, bah, whatever. And then you just kind of move on. You don't even actually, validate or invalidate the claim. You just ignore it. And then in the second world, you will actively shun misinformation. And some people will go full kind of conspiracy, where, they're like, okay, well, sure, fine. The CDC said that, but they're compromised by the government. I know that everything they say is fake. Or like, okay, sure. Yeah, the crime stats might be that, but I think that SJWs report the crime stats wrong. I don't believe that. Like they lie about that. Or, two really important questions I always ask myself when I'm researching any particular topic. The first question is, can I argue the other side convincingly well? And I can for any topic that I argue. If I have a debate, usually the reason why most of my conversations are so easy is because whatever the other person says, I've already had this conversation either with someone else or myself, so I kind of know the back and forth. You should always be able to argue the other position well and in good faith. So when I say argue the other position, it doesn't mean like, okay, well, why are you against Blue Lives Matter? Well, I'm against Blue Lives Matter because being a police officer is not a lifestyle, that's an occupation. I'm against it because I think it's a counter protest to an important social cause that, talks about issues related to police officers and African Americans. And I think that movement has been co-opted by a lot of really bad people that I think are legitimately pushing some kind of, racial propaganda. That might be like that might be the anti-Blue Lives Matter side. But then the pro-Blue Lives Matter side, if somebody's like, well, can you give what is their support for it, And you're like, well, they're probably all like racist and, they just hate, whatever. They just hate people and they're hateful. And it's like, okay, well, that's not an honest summary of their points, right? If that's your impression of the other side, then when you do have conversations with those people, you're going to be totally blindsided by them bringing up stuff. And you're like, oh, God, I didn't even prepare for this discussion. Like, shoot, I didn't think about any of this. And then that's where the screaming matches come in. Because if you're fully convinced the other side is just evil, well, there's no conversation really to be had there.
Counter arguments.
What?
Anticipating counter arguments.
Mm-hmm. Not even anticipate. You should already know them. You should know them. If you argue any point, you should know 4 or 5 levels down, where that conversation is going to go every time. You absolutely should. That's the first thing. The second thing is I always ask myself the question. So the first one is you should be able to argue both sides convincingly. The second one is you should always be able to ask yourself what type of evidence would convince you that you're wrong. And if you don't have an answer for that, then you are lost in a media bubble and you have to pull yourself out because now you're, you can't be convinced with any amount of reason or logic. So you're probably not going to convince other people. Because sometimes you'll ask people okay, well, you believe that, this issue about trans athletes, or you believe this issue about foreign policy or Medicare for all, what would it take? What would I have to show you for you to change your opinion on that? And if you're like, well, no, I'm never changing my opinion on that. It's like, no amount of factual information can ever change. It's like, no. Okay, well, why are we even having this discussion then? You don't seem like you've built this out reasonably, so I can't reasonably change your mind, and I don't expect you to be able to reasonably change my mind.
Yeah, that's good. All right, so I have actually a really hard question for you.
Okay.
What do you do if you're wrong?
If I'm wrong, I usually scream and shout at people for a few days, and then after a week or two, I'll mellow out. It's like, it's honest to God. I hold myself to a high standard because I do like internet debates all the time. But like, I never expect anybody to change their mind on the spot. I can't do it. It's very, very hard because you're super emotionally. Even when you're not being emotional, you can get pretty attached to arguments pretty easily. So and my fan base will scream at me sometimes because they'll be saying things like, "Oh, like why didn't you hammer them harder on this?" or "Why didn't you call him an idiot?" And it's like, and usually my response is, "Listen." Even if you're shown all the information in the world, in the middle of an adversarial conversation is very, very rare. Maybe if you're the Pope, for somebody to be like, you know what? I didn't consider that. You're absolutely right. I totally changed my mind. Like, that's just never going to happen. And even I can't do that. But if you run into an argument over and over again and you feel like, you don't have a good response to it, then in your own time, you be a little introspective, reflect on it, do some more research. And if you find out your opinion is wrong, then hey, it's wrong. It shouldn't matter if your opinion is wrong, because you should be tied to the outcomes and not the processes. If you really want to help homeless people and you argue until you're blue in the face that public housing is the best way to get that done, and people show you study after study after study, well, public housing doesn't seem to work, doesn't seem like that's a good idea, at some point you should be able to say, well, you know what, at the end of the day, I just want to get more homeless people in homes. I guess public housing isn't the way to go. That's fine. And then you maybe back off of that. But if you're really tied to just that process, in your mind, you're hearing, well, if you don't want public housing, you just want homeless people to stay homeless, and if that's what's going on in your mind, you're never going to be able to back away from that position.
I agree. Yeah, go ahead.
In your experience, do you think it's easier to debate or like research and discuss a topic that you're more emotionally invested in, or something that you have less experience with?
That's a really hard one. Hold on. There's two different ways to approach that question. In terms of being able to dispassionately and logically engage with the topic, if you have a deep or heavy emotional investment into that topic, then it might be really hard for you to be a neutral debater, basically, in regards to that particular topic. So in that way, having a personal engagement might hurt you. In another way, having a personal engagement can be really big for two reasons. One is if you have some firsthand experience with the topic, it might be that you have better arguments that you can give because of that firsthand experience, number one. And number two, if you are emotional and you have firsthand experience and you can channel it well, other people will see you as being more effective because you can kind of channel all those other parts of an argument. Have you guys done like the logos, pathos, ethos stuff?
Not yet. We will.
Okay, yeah. Like basically, there are people will say that there's like three broad ways of convincing people. You can either have a good character, you can either be very like logical, or you can kind of appeal to people's emotional faculty. And the best sorts of arguments are going to kind of apply to all three of these parts of this pyramid. But like having somebody say, like, we can argue about whether or not military intervention is good or bad until we're blue in the face. But, having a parent come on stage and say, hey, like, we did military intervention here. My child was around the tar pits and now they're permanently disabled. And, and then them crying over it. That's going to be like really powerful for a lot of people to watch. Even if the argument isn't necessarily, logical or rational, like the emotional side there is going to be pretty powerful for people to watch. So there's like different ways to argue, right? We can argue to convince people. We can argue to be correct. Depending on what you're arguing for, what your purpose is going to depend on the types of strategies, I guess, you employ to, I guess, win that argument.
Yeah, that's a good question. One of the things I wanted to ask was if you have any way of like testing your arguments and your positions before you sort of affect them. I mean, obviously your chat, who I've been watching, by the way, is amazing. Right, so they're going to give you some interesting pointers.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, do you have people that you talk to, or do you have some way in which you might test your position before you bring it to the rest of the world?
If I'm preparing for a debate on like a pretty hardcore topic that I haven't invested much time into before, I'll just like grab my laptop and go sit on my couch, and I might just like write down stuff. Like let's say somebody says that like, man, I'm trying to think. Let's say that I've never thought about abortion in my life, right? I might literally just write down on a notepad, like, women should be able to have an abortion. And then I might think like, well, what's a counter argument to that? It's like, well, what about the life of the fetus? And then I might say like, oh, well, a fetus isn't alive. It's like, oh, well, what is a life? And I might just follow that and just write out that thing. And then once I've written it down and I have like a feeling for it, maybe I'll go back and I'll be like, okay, well, what's like another argument? You know, like, oh, well, you know, maybe you should be able to abort up to 2 years old if we allow people to have an abortion. Or, oh, well, maybe, you know, whether or not you have an abortion or not is just a private matter between you and a doctor, which is essentially what the Supreme Courts have said. You know, I'll just start jotting stuff down for arguments on both sides. If I'm talking to myself, I guess. The most valuable thing you could do is if you have friends that are of different political backgrounds than you, just ask them. If you've got like a friend that's a conservative, it's like, hey, like, why do people love the cops so much? It seems kind of weird, no? Like, just ask them, like, oh, you know, well, we live in a small town. We all know our cops. Like, they're chill people. Usually, like, generally when you see a cop, he's like helping a dude change a tire on the street. You know, like, a small community's engagement with their local police force might be a lot different than, you know, like certain communities' engagements with the police in like Chicago or Detroit or something. Another thing might be that if it's an argument you've never explored before, just Google the people that are known for making those arguments. You know, if somebody's telling you that like, you know, women can mess up the workplace, okay, well, what does Jordan Peterson say about that? It seems like everybody talks about him when it comes to that. Look up and see what he says about it. And then like, you know, try to figure out, well, would you be able to argue against these points? And then if you can, write it down, remember it. If you can't, I don't know, change your opinion or or talk to somebody else that thinks they can, yeah.
Do you watch other people who do what you do?
No, I don't. But I don't have time to. I stream like 10 hours a day and then I'm doing gym or other stuff. So if I had more time, maybe I would. But, well, actually, I guess sometimes I'll go over other debates on my stream before and I'll kind of critique, like, did this person do a good job bringing this up? Did this person come off as unhinged here? So I guess sometimes on my stream, I'll review other people having challenging conversations and I'll see how they did, yeah.
I've seen a couple of your videos in which someone, like one of your fans, has caught wind of another like debate group or whatever, who is like talking about you, and then you sort of get pulled into those conversations. But I was wondering if you ever, you know, I don't know if there's other people who you take that you admire or that you think do a good job.
No, I think 99% of the political punditry that goes on YouTube and Twitch and like all the alternative media, I think is absolute trash. I don't think anybody should be getting any information from here. I think most of it is just straight garbage. But I will say that there seem to be, like in the podcasting world, actually, hold on, let me back up. That's not fair to say. I think that if you get into like niche topics, like there are a few really good historical podcasts. There are some people that do stuff about like medical topics and whatever. There are a few of these that are pretty good, but I think all of like the popular, really entertaining ones, I think it could be really hard to get good information out of these, even if they are entertaining. I would consider all of these like food for thought, but God help you if you ever cite some of these in a conversation. Like, I think that Joe Rogan can be a really fun guy to listen to, and I think he can bring on interesting guests, and maybe that could be like a good like launching point. But if you listen to that, and that's just like, well, that's my foundation for the world is what I heard on the Joe Rogan Experience, I think you're going to run into a lot of problems having a good understanding of the world. Is how I would say. And a lot of the more entertaining things will definitely sacrifice factual accuracy in the name of being hyperbolic or entertaining or kind of shilling for one particular political side.
Yeah. There's two things that I kind of want to push this a little bit. Number one, so I listened to a series of discussions between Jordan Peterson, who I personally disagree with, and then, oh gosh, what is his name?
Sam Harris? Or
yeah, Sam Harris.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Sam Harris. And I thought those discussions were excellent. I thought that they were well moderated, and I thought that they were thoughtful, and I thought that they have a lot sort of to give philosophically, which I thought was admirable. But I do not live in the same world that you do, and I think your impulses on the sort of Twitch or YouTube world are good. The other thing I wanted to ask is if you have thoughts on investigative journalism, and like if it still exists anymore, and if it should, and what its like sort of role. And it doesn't have to necessarily be by. And we were talking before class started about the movie Spotlight, for instance, right? And about how finding information and bringing forth information has transformed over the years. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's a couple things. So on the first one, the only thing I would say is that like it gets complicated. Some people are good at some things and are really bad at other things. They don't realize it, and you should be aware of that so you don't write off everything they say. So I'm very critical of Jordan Peterson a lot because I think that when he starts talking politics or philosophy or history, things get very questionable very fast. But usually when he's talking about psychology, everything he says is usually dead on. I haven't heard him talk about psychology in a way where it's like, oh my God, he's so wrong about that. Like usually he's pretty correct whenever he's citing stuff there. But some people will like hate his political takes so much that when he starts talking about psychology, they very quickly write all of that off as well. Like, oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about for anything. It's like, well, no, that's not true. He does know what he's talking about here. And even if you disagree with some of his other takes, you should at least be able to state why. Don't just say like, oh, it's Jordan Peterson. I hate him. I don't even consider what he says. Like, well, maybe you should because a lot of people listen to him. In terms of investigative journalism, I think investigative journalism can be really good and can be really powerful. I think it just depends on who's asking the questions. And I think it's really important to be aware of like there are a couple things that are, how do I say this? I notice sometimes that when somebody does an investigative piece on somebody, or we can do the Hillary Clinton stuff. Sometimes people will dig into one side of the political aisle. So arguably you could say Assange and WikiLeaks did this with Hillary Clinton and the Democratic National Committee, the DNC. And people are like, oh, well, this is really good. Like, I think this is good investigative journalism because we're getting all of these leaks out from the Democratic Party. It's good. We're getting more information, you know? But the problem is that when you do investigative journalism on only one side, I think that in a way, it is good that we're getting that information, but in some ways it's bad because you get this false sense that the other side must be totally clean, right? Like, oh, well, you know, this is all getting leaked about this side, but the other side, you know, nobody's done anything on them or nobody's looking into that. So it seems like they're probably good. It can lead you into thinking that somebody is more good or more bad than they actually are, you know? And I think Assange is on record saying that, you know, we had information about Trump and what was going on in the Republican Party, but we didn't release that because we thought that what he was currently doing was already bad enough. And it's like, okay, well, that's kind of weird. Now it makes me wonder, you know, like, am I only getting one side of the story? I think you have to be really careful of that. Also, investigative journalism. I don't want to throw the whole thing under the bus, but like I know, for instance, if you've ever heard of like Project Veritas, they do a lot of like investigative journalism, but a lot of the stuff can be edited or cut together in a very deceptive way, and it's kind of good to be cognizant of that. I guess it sounds weird because I'm technically part of the alternative media, but I would just be really careful about alternative media because there's no accountability here. Like I can literally go on stream and I could lie about almost everything, and then tomorrow I could be like, oh well, you know, we're not talking about that anymore, and my fan base will probably be chill with it because, you know, it's the internet and you have fans and who cares. And I think that is the case with a lot of alternative media. Whereas with mainstream media, usually if people are getting things really wrong, generally somebody's head is going to roll. Somebody's getting fired, somebody's getting demoted, somebody's getting at the very least suspended because journalists get really mad at each other when they mess stuff up like that, and they'll go on social media and they'll start attacking each other. So this is all in general, by the way. Not to say that mainstream media doesn't mess up sometimes. They absolutely do. And not to say that the alternative media never gets anything right. Sometimes they do as well. Yeah.
What else? Anybody else? I feel like I'm monopolizing the conversation. I don't want to do that.
Yeah, you're good.
No? You guys are pretty happy? All right. I do have one more thing that I want to ask you, and then I think we're good. And so you mentioned, you know, it depends, like how long you prepare for a thing will depend on what you're preparing for. And to sort of bridge that to what we're doing here, I wonder if you have an idea of when something breaks, when something new happens, right? How do you get a sense of having gathered enough information to form like a coherent position that you feel comfortable with?
I wait a few days. I don't ever do. I think the breaking news whole culture is absolutely cancerous. It's some of the worst stuff that happens in the world. When you guys participate in it, it's bad. When people in the media drive it, it's bad. People will form these huge opinions around a 15-second video clip, and it absolutely blows my mind how, like, I've seen it happen over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, where 15-second video clip gets released, and it's like, oh, well, now new context came out, and now this is totally different. Now this looks way different. Now this is nowhere near as bad as we thought it was, or this is worse than we thought it was. Like, there's literally no advantage to forming an opinion early. Like, nobody cares what you think about it. Nobody cares what some media pundit says about it. It's not going to change the legal outcome of the case. It's not going to change like what actually happened. Like just chill, wait for like at least like 1 or 2 days for like more information to get released or for more statements to be made. And then you can start to form opinions about things rather than like feeling like you have to be the first one to get out there and give your opinion so that everybody can have the hottest take, or it can be the wokest person or the least woke person or whatever political side you're on. Like you want to go do you think? Like, I just think it's so dumb and it's so detrimental to like our media environment that I don't know. I try to avoid that breaking news stuff as much as possible.
Yeah, it's good. You said that yesterday. I kind of want to get to that.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, the other thing you said yesterday is I asked you if you saw a way forward or a way out, and I believe you said you were doom-pilled on this.
Yeah, just there's too much money to be made like selling kind of like political, partisan, like sensationalist ideas, and I think that that's more important to making money than to being factually accurate. I don't think people really care that much about factual accuracy. People just kind of want sensational headlines that kind of drive them because they already agree with what you're going to say, basically. And as long as I can give you enough of that, then you're going to give me your money or your view time or whatever, and that's what people care about. So I think that as long as we have those incentives set up, then I think we're pretty doomed in terms of getting better media environments figured out. Figured out.
I think part of the function of this class is to make us better consumers, and yeah, I really appreciate everything. Everyone, Stephen, I want to say thank you to him, please. He did such a great job. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Have a good one.